A question that I'm asked with kind of surprising frequency is, if humans evolved from apes, why are there still apes? Now, this reflects a certain misunderstanding about evolution that a lot of people have. Evolution is not, I'll say it again, it's not a march of progress toward this perfect human form that we inhabit. Humans are a highly evolved organism, but so are chimpanzees, so are gorillas, so are oak trees. Every form can be different, and each one is uniquely adapted to the conditions that it has to survive in. Additionally, humans didn't evolve from apes. Humans are one category of ape, along with all of the other members of the great ape family. We didn't come from chimpanzees, we didn't come from gorillas, we shared common ancestry with those two groups. Now, in order to see how you could have different species coming from a single common ancestor, probably all you have to do is really think about your own family history. So I'll use mine as an example. My last name is Klein. Klein is a German word. It means little or small, so my parents basically named me Little John. But Klein is a very common surname back in Germany, so there's lots of Kleins back there. There's a whole German population of Kleins, but some of them, at some point in history, came over to the United States and created a new American population of Kleins. And we spread out. The Klein's a very common name in the United States as well now, so there's a lot of Kleins here as well. We have a rich population. If you were to genetically sample one random Klein from the United States and one random Klein from Germany, you would probably be able to tell which one was from which population, because each group would have developed its own unique characteristic mutations over time. For a moment, ignoring the idea that we could just hop a plane back and forth and use gene flow to kind of mix things up. The existence of this American population of Kleins doesn't mean that the Kleins back in Germany ceased to exist, because evolution is not a single line, it's branching paths. So let's think about this in terms of biology, in terms of a biological population. Let's say we have a single breeding pair which creates several offspring. Remember, one of those ideas that we used when we were first talking about natural selection was that organisms tend to produce more offspring than are required to replace themselves. So from one individual, we get 3 individuals coming out, and they end up being successful. Now, organisms tend to spread out. They move all over the place, and each of these individuals goes to a different location, and they start their own little family lines. They have a couple of kids each. These kids, these offspring, are going to have their own unique genetic traits. They're going to have a few mutations that the children in the other populations don't have. Now, some of these probably are not going to grow up to reproductive maturity. Some of them will create dead ends. Maybe this organism doesn't work, and maybe this organism doesn't work. But these organisms are marginally successful. They make more offspring that are kind of like themselves. So they're somewhat successful, but maybe this one is really successful, and it makes several offspring that are kind of like it, but each with their own genetic diversity. Meanwhile, over here, this one's moderately successful. Some of its offspring don't survive, but some of them do. So, if we continue this process, organisms spreading and having more offspring than they need, some of them being genetic dead ends, but others continuing on into the future, making more and more generations, each one of these family lines can found a new breeding population. And over time, these populations will get more and more and more different from each other. The offspring of this triangle are going to be different from the offspring of this diamond here. And we can get 2 different species. Species 2 and species 3. The existence of one descendant of a particular lineage doesn't mean that there aren't other descendants of that particular lineage, and they can go in different directions. So this is how you can get multiple species coming from a single progenitor ancestor. We can divide the concept of macroevolution, which is discussing the idea of new species emerging, new kinds of species from evolution, into branching evolution and non-branching evolution. In non-branching evolution, you have a single breeding population, and generation by generation, they're not spreading out too much. They are just all breeding together. Say they're all these birds here are on the same island, and they can't really spread out, so it's all one big breeding population. But new mutations are still going to pop up on that island, and directional selection is still going to do its thing. And eventually, you might get a situation where the great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandson of some bird doesn't look anything like the original bird, that we would take the two, compare them, and say these are two different species. That's non-branching evolution. But you also might get branching evolution, where a single starting population gives rise to multiple modern species, two different kinds of birds emerging. Now maybe one of them is not all that much changed from the original ancestor, and the other one is, or maybe it goes to make 2 or 3 or 4 completely new species as a result. Now, a lot of different factors can drive evolutionary change. So far, we've been mostly talking about kind of predator-prey interactions, this kind of very combative form of evolutionary theory, which is kind of what Darwin imagined. But there's also a lot of other factors that might drive natural selection. Fitness is only your capacity to reproduce. The more babies you have, the more fit you are. It has nothing to do with how aggressive or strong or sharp your teeth are or any of that kind of stuff. It might, but it has to do with how many offspring you can make ultimately. And there are a lot of factors which might increase your fitness. For example, we have something called sexual selection. In sexual selection, maybe an organism isn't more fit because they are stronger, or because they're bigger, or they're a better predator, or they're better at hiding. Maybe they're more fit because they're more attractive. Maybe they're more fit because they tend to attract more mates than less fit males do. So take a look at this peacock. Peacocks are all male, right? The species is called peafowl, and peahens are the females, and you're probably not too familiar with what a peahen looks like because peacocks get all of the attention.
Peacocks are the most shallow of all male birds.
Peahens kind of look more pheasant-like. They kind of look like a ruffed grouse a little bit. They're just kind of brown in coloration, whereas the males have this bright, beautiful plumage, and it's all there to attract the females. The brighter the colors are, the more females are going to be attracted. Over evolutionary time, the criteria for fitness had less to do with survival and more to do with just raw reproduction. It had to do with how many mates the males of this species could attract. And since the females always wanted the ones with the brightest plumage, the biggest feathers, the best coloration, the highest contrast spots, then that is what got selected for. So directional selection made them more and more bright and colorful and showy. If you actually think about a peacock, it's possibly the least survival-ready phenotype that you could imagine. It's got this big, long tail, which doesn't do anything. It makes it hard to fly, and it's really easy for predators to just put their paw down on that tail to prevent it from running away. So it's really easy to catch a peacock and eat it. And it's got this bright coloration, which makes it stick out. It's not camouflaged in any way, shape, or form. It's basically the opposite of camouflage. So these guys get eaten by predators a lot. But before they get eaten, they get to reproduce. And that's what fitness is all about, is reproduction. So sexual selection is when certain traits are being selected for, not because they're good for survival, but because they are reflecting mating preferences. It's not completely ridiculous that the females are going for the brightest, showiest males. If you think about it, right? If you have a male with extremely bright coloration, he's very showy, very gaudy, and he's still alive, well then he must have it going on in some other places. Maybe he's smart enough to avoid those predators. Maybe he's got a really healthy immune system, and maybe he's got a lot of muscle power or something like that. There's something that's allowed him to survive even though he's all bright and showy. If his feathers are really good, then he's probably very, very healthy as well. And if they have a healthy father, then the offspring will probably be healthy as well. So the plumage of these peacocks kind of acts as a proxy for how survival ready or how useful the genes of that peacock might end up being. So now we can see that rather than just this aggressive, combative, push and pull, attacking each other, fighting for survival kind of interpretation of natural selection that Darwin originally envisioned, there are other influences that can affect this process as well. Sexual selection is one, and another is coevolution. Coevolution is when the evolutionary development of one species affects the evolutionary development of another. In other words, the set of traits that make a given species fit might be influenced by the fitness or the traits expressed by another species. Hummingbirds have a very close ecological relationship with the flowers that they pollinate. They go from flower to flower to flower, sucking the nectar, that sugar water that flowers produce, out of the flower. So the hummingbird gets an advantage from this relationship. It gains something from it. But some pollen gets onto the hummingbird's beak and face, and then when it goes to another flower, some of that pollen gets left behind on that flower. So they are helping the flowers to reproduce. They are helping pollinate these flowers. So both organisms benefit from this mutualistic symbiotic relationship that they have. But notice how perfectly shaped that hummingbird's beak is to that flower and how perfectly shaped that flower is to the hummingbird's beak, almost like they were made for one another. But this is something that can occur through evolutionary time through the phenomenon of coevolution. The longer the hummingbird's beak is, the easier time it has reaching the nectar inside that flower. So evolution is saying that longer and longer and longer beaks are more fit for this particular hummingbird. Now, from the flower's perspective, it would prefer it if the hummingbird would specialize to just that one particular species of flower. To understand this, think about it. If a hummingbird pollinates this flower, and then it goes off to pollinate a completely different flower, a rose, a daisy, a dandelion, something like that, well, there's no evolutionary benefit to that to the flower. It can only breed with other members of its same species or closely related species. So, in order to ensure that this hummingbird only arrives at this flower, it makes sure that it's got this really long shoot, this kind of sheath for the hummingbird's beak, and then only this hummingbird can get the nectar from this flower. Now, since only this particular hummingbird can get the nectar from this flower, it doesn't have to compete for resources with other kinds of birds in that area. So they are matching up with each other. The evolutionary trajectory of one species is guiding the evolutionary trajectory of another species. So over time, the flowers get longer and thinner, the beak gets longer, and they grow to match each other. So this is a coevolutionary process. Both organisms' fitness is increased by growing a compatibility with one another, Another example of coevolution that's a little bit more antagonistic is the concept of an evolutionary arms race. In an evolutionary arms race, organisms develop offensive or defensive traits that are out of proportion to what they actually need. They just get stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger. Here I have a snake, a venomous snake on this slide. Now we have venomous snakes around here as well. We have copperheads and we got timber rattlers. And I actually had a run-in with some timber rattlers not too long ago. I was on a hike. It was summer. My wife and I, we got up to a nice outcrop of rocks, nice sunny spot, break in the trees, great place to take a little sit, have a drink of water. And as I reached down for my water bottle at this nice, relaxing, sunny location, that's when I heard that sound, that telltale sound of a rattlesnake rattle. And of course, my heart skipped a beat in terror because I don't want to be bitten by a rattlesnake when I'm 15 miles away from my car and I have no cell phone service as well. So as it turned out, right next to where I put my water bottle, underneath the rocks, there was a timber rattler all coiled up underneath the rock. Well, of course, I did what any idiot would do. I decided to take a picture of the timber rattler. I squatted down and I said, oh boy, that's going to go great for the scrapbook. For anyone who was curious, yes, I did get a picture of the rattlesnake just prior to fleeing for my life. And while I was taking that photo is when I heard the second coming from not too far behind me. And I turned around, and about 10 feet away from me, I saw another timber rattler sunning itself on a rock, and then I saw a third and a fourth, and I realized that this is not a pleasant location to take a break. We were in Snake City, USA. So we, very calmly and quietly, got out of there, and we found another place to take a break where it wasn't maybe so sunny in the height of rattlesnake season. Now, consider that story for a moment. I was terrified of this relatively small animal biting me. Why? Well, obviously because it's venomous, and its venom could have actually killed me if I couldn't get anti-venom in time, and if that had been the case, if it had bitten me, I probably would not have been able to. So, that is a pretty good reason to be terrified, but that just moves the goalpost on the question. Why is its venom strong enough to kill me? After all, a rattlesnake can't eat me. It can't swallow me. I'm entirely too large to be food for that rattlesnake. And it doesn't have to defend itself against humans on a regular basis. So there wouldn't be any strong selection pressure to cause their venom to become that strong. They don't have that regular of contact with humans trying to remove them. So why is its venom so strong? Part of the reason could have to do with coevolution between it and its selected prey. So down here on the slide, we have another kind of venomous snake, a cobra, and cobra have an interesting relationship with another kind of organism called a mongoose. Anyone who read a little bit of Kipling when you were a kid, you might remember the story of Rikki Tikki Tavi, the mongoose that befriends a family of humans and he defends them against these evil cobras that are coming in. Those stories about mongooses and cobras fighting each other are actually a reflection of a real biological relationship. You see, as these snakes started their evolutionary history, they were not that venomous. They were kind of venomous, right? And they could bite prey, and the prey would get an allergic reaction to their bite, or it would be a neurotoxin. It would hurt them that way, and the prey would die, and that was great for the snake. But just like those insects that we were spraying with pesticides way back a few videos ago, that means that they are selecting for the prey which are more resistant to that venom. Only the ones that are resistant are going to be able to get bit and then run away to survive and breed and fight another day. So over time, the snakes started selecting for prey that were more and more resistant to their venom. Because the prey were more and more resistant to the venom, a new selection pressure showed up for the snakes to become more and more venomous, for the venom to become more and more potent. So the snakes get more and more potent venom, and the mongooses get more and more resistance to that venom. And they get an evolutionary arms race. There's no cap on this. They just keep competing with each other, each one trying to get an advantage, until the mongoose's resistance to the venom is truly incredible. They can be bitten a few times by a cobra by some accounts and survive and shake it off. And the cobra's venom is strong enough to take down several human adults because it is so potent, even though it was not evolved for the purpose of taking down human prey. So this is an example of coevolution. A little bit more antagonistic than the hummingbird and the flower, but yet again, this is one organism's evolutionary trajectory affecting a different organism's evolutionary trajectory.